Okay. Call the meeting to order of the Kerrville Economic Improvement Corporation, and Danny's agreed to lead us in the invocation.
Heavenly Father, thank you for this beautiful day here in our beautiful home of Kerrville. We appreciate all the blessings you bestowed upon us and ask for your continued care and guidance as we move forward with the people's business. Bless our new city leaders and help them make good decisions for our citizens. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Yes, do we have any visitors that have signed to speak today?
No, sir.
Are we doing any visitors by remote access? We still doing that, or is it
No, sir.
just in person? Okay. Great.
Great.
All right, the next item on our agenda, item 4A, is to review the minutes from the regular Economic Improvement Corporation meeting held on April 19th, 2021. These are in your packets. I'll entertain a motion to approve those.
Make a motion, we approve item 4A.
Second.
Motion to second. Any further discussion? If none, all those in favor, raise your right hand. Okay, those minutes are approved. All right, Mr. Salinas, would you give us an update on the Kerr Economic Development Corporation? Good afternoon. No touching.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. So I'm going to have a brief report today. I'm going to start with some of the census numbers that are starting to come out and the impact that it's starting to have at the local level, or at least looking forward. And then I'll get into some of the local project activities. So as far as the U.S. population, the numbers that we're seeing is that the U.S. population grew by about 7.4% over the last decade. And though it kind of sounds significant, it's actually the smallest increase that we've seen since the 1930s, basically since the Great Depression. Some of the very interesting trends that we've seen is that for the first time ever, really in the history of the country, we're experiencing a decline in birth rates, which is the primary reason for the slow growth in the country. And then the other one is that half of the counties in the United States showed a decrease in population as well. Again, very unheard of, and this is primarily in the Midwest and the Northeast also. The biggest state, which is California, they lost population, which is the first time, and that's the largest state, first time since the 1890s that they recorded a loss in population in that state. Texas, and we know the story there, we continue to be basically on steroid growth. We're the second largest state, huge, massive growth pattern. We're nearly at 30 million people, just under 30 million. But now to put things in perspective, California is at about 40 million, about 39.5, something like that. Another interesting stat is that today there's more Americans that are 80 years and older than 2 years and younger. That's the one that just kind of blew me away. So that's a huge indicator of a demographic stagnation, how we're going to start seeing a decline in workforce, very relative to the aging population, and it is going to impact our future economic growth. So experts are saying that birth rates alone is not going to solve this problem. So we just have to be, as economic developers, we have to be very mindful of these patterns, in the next 10, 20, 30 years down the road. On that same note, the U.S. Department of Commerce reported that the national economy, we have seen a 6.4% growth rate as far as our GDP from January through March. So that's a huge indicator that the economy now is starting to officially rebound. And they're expecting it to hit up to 14% by the end of the year, probably sooner than that. And if that happens, then that would be the highest growth rate that we've seen since 1984. So that's very welcome news. And again, that's primarily due to the fast rollout of the vaccine, which is creating consumer confidence, which is in turn driving the recovery and spurring the economy. And again, we've seen that here at the local level, more so than in other parts of the country. Now, moving on to some project activity, we've met with and or have had a conference call with 5 different investment groups and firms in the last 2 to 3 weeks. The reason I'm bringing them up because that's kind of unusual. We've never had a cluster like that reach out to us before. So as far as investors, there's a hotel prospect. This one came through Julie Davis at the CVB. Very preliminary, but they're requesting data on housing, where are visitors coming from, for a possible, again, they're just doing their demographic research to see where they would put a hotel, and Kerrville's on their radar. We met with another investor. This one's from the Dallas area. She moved in a few months ago, and they're inquiring about the real estate opportunities specifically for residential subdivisions. And this is something that they've done in the southern part of Dallas in the past. Now they want to replicate that model here. And then we also, last week, met with a site selector out of Dallas, a pretty large firm. And they've been requesting, again, demographic data. So they're in the information stage, and they're representing 2 national restaurants that are looking at properties here in Kerrville. We've gotten with the city as far as who they are, that way we're on the same page. Now, when it comes to retail and commercial developments, just to be clear, the city takes a lead and we're in a support role. So when we start taking these calls, they automatically get punted over to the city, and we're the ones that support, the project from our end. And then lastly, we've been on a series of calls with another Texas developer. And as a result, we're going to be hosting his investors next week. They're coming in from the Northeast, and they are looking at a large-scale commercial development, specifically designed for a family entertainment venue. So there's not much I can say on this one before I start disclosing too many details, but that one I haven't gotten with the city yet. We'll be meeting this weekend for that particular project. Some other activity, the Kerr Edge Entrepreneur Center, that was officially launched about a couple of weeks ago. Again, it's virtual, for the moment. The Mastermind series, that starts tomorrow, so we've got about 15 to 16 participants, which is usually you want about a dozen people in these these cohorts for a series like that. So this is going to be a great leadership tool and resource for our local workforce and some of our entrepreneurs. And again, this is just a great example of really working to upskill our local talent, which in turn helps with the recruitment strategies that we have for some of these forward-thinking companies. And again, remote workers, this is what they're looking for. The next industry roundtable luncheon, that's going to be our first one in person since we launched it almost 2 years ago. That's going to be June 9th at the Kerrville Hills Winery. John, the owner, John Rivenberg, he's going to be giving us a tour of the winery. And then he's got an incubator program there as well. He started developing specifically for the spirits industry. So we're going to be learning about that. We're going to be discussing the spirits trail, craft agriculture, and its huge potential for Kerrville as an economic engine. Just totally different, or not different, but separate from everything else that we're doing. So some huge opportunities. Again, goes back into our recruitment strategy as far as vendors and suppliers. And again, coming back to those remote workers that are looking for these particular amenities. Let's see. So that's all I have as far as project activity and what have you. And I'd like just to close with, we're looking forward to working with EA now that he's going to be moving into his new role. Building on the current successes, on the successes that we've had at the EDC. But on top of that, now looking at, him coming in and putting his own stamp and his own brand as far as what we're doing for economic development and beyond for this community. That concludes my report. If you all have any questions.
Okay, thank you, Gil.
All right, thank you.
All right, our next item on the agenda is the monthly EIC project status report, and Mr. Hoppy's provided us with a copy of the 7 projects that we currently have in play. Anybody have any thoughts, questions, comments on those before we move on?
A lot of changes from last month. Obviously, the big one is some great progress being made over at Doyle, and then the big one obviously is the downtown River Trail concept study, which is on YouTube.
Yeah. Thank you for the updates. Okay, Ms. Dozier, will you update us on our finances?
Yes, I will. Good afternoon. All right. Let's start with our financial statements for the month of April. So I'm looking at the third column, or actually the second column over, current period. I'm going to start with the revenues and talking about sales tax. So sales tax is definitely the big story. For the month of April, $262,000. And we talked about this a little bit last month. You'll remember that sales tax is collected on a 2-month lag, so that April collection relates to actual February sales. And April sales tax was basically flat with the prior year, no increase at all. But when we did get our detail by taxpayer from the comptroller, we saw declines at businesses that were closed for about a week during February during the winter storm. So it appears that the reason, that was the primary driver for sales tax being flat. The bigger news that is not reflected here, but that City Council got a sneak peek on last week, we received our sales tax for the month of May on Friday, and it is the largest sales tax payment that we've ever received in the city, single month sales tax payment, up 38% from last year. And historically, February is our largest month, and that relates to December sales, so, Christmas sales. We've never had May as our largest month. So yeah, it's really crazy. We've requested detail from the comptroller. We have not received that yet. It takes about 10 business days to get it. So this is just my speculation, but I think we're seeing the impact of multiple things. First of all, May 2020 was a little bit down. So this time last year, March of 2020 was when we started having COVID closures that we saw that actually hit in May of 2020 with sales tax being down some that month. So that was one thing. So we're kind of comparing to a low month. Then the second thing is I'm guessing that some of those winter storm closures, there was some rebound the next month, and probably especially with home repairs and that kind of thing after the winter storm. So that probably hit in March, and we're receiving it in May. And then also the economic stimulus payments, the current round started going out on March 12th. So I think we're seeing some of that hit the economy as well. Statewide payments were up like 30% as well. So, but we're doing better than the statewide average. So just really incredible numbers on that sales tax front. On the expenditure side, just normal monthly expenditures for administrative services, quarterly payment to KEDC, monthly payment for debt service, and then on the project side, just like what EA was talking about, 2 projects with activity. One is the Doyle School, and we're seeing construction payments come through for them, as well as a little bit of architect fees and asbestos removal. And then $50,000 for a transfer related to the Downtown River Trail feasibility study that we'll hear about shortly. So that put EIC ending the month with a change in net position of minus $7,000, but still very good news overall. Looking at the next page is our cash flow forecast. Cash flow forecast just continues to get better. We're now looking at like a low of 2.3 million by the end of June. I did push that Killdeer final payment out some, and I'm not exactly sure what the timing is going to be there, but this does reflect higher sales tax numbers through April. And then the last page just has some financial analysis on a couple of different items. You see the list of projects there, the cash analysis. We still have the same EIC tax pool investment that's completely liquid, currently earning 8 basis points. And then the sales tax revenue analysis over on the right, and that's where you can see that huge number in May that we just talked about. And that's all I have. Any questions on financial report?
Amy, you or EA on that page, committed project, airport projects, 375,000. Refresh my memory, that is for the Horseshoe Building?
There's 2 parts. So there's the Horseshoe Building, and then there's also the add-ons to the box hangar project. So that, I think, is still in alignment with if and when they get a contractor to do the T-hanger project, while those folks are mobilized, being able to utilize them to also do some of the site grading and prep work in relation to box hangers. So that's the 2 EIC components.
What's the status on the Horseshoe?
Yeah, the status on the horseshoe is that the building has been demolished, but they are, continuing to look at the rest of the facility for, it's really jobs related, right? So if they've got, the way the agreement's crafted is that they've got to have a jobs producing entity that wants to go in there before they're able to really kind of put a plan together, because it's going to be essentially a build to suit.
We're just sitting on those funds until a project comes along.
Correct.
But they are
Yeah,
committed.
and they are invoicing us as they make payments is how they, and well, but we haven't paid much so far, but it's not an upfront transfer. It's just if they have a payment, they'll invoice EIC for that payment. All right, thank y'all.
Okay, thank you. All right, we've got two items on the agenda, 6A and 6B. We need to set a meeting for our annual EIC meeting for June, and then also discuss setting up a meeting for a workshop to discuss ideas for EIC investments into the community. Mr. Hayes, is there any reason why we can't set our regular June meeting as our annual meeting? Does it have to be separate than that?
No.
Okay. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments on, when is our June meeting?
21st? No.
That would be the 21st, would be your third Monday regular meeting. And that has been your typical practice of the body here the last 3 years anyway. You have set your annual meeting, which is, prescribed by charter for June 1st. You had the authority to move it, and it has typically been moved to that third Monday, but
So
purview of the body.
June 21st?
Fine with me.
Follow me?
Yeah, good. Okay, can we get a motion to set our annual meeting for June 21st at 4 PM?
I move that we set the annual meeting for June 21st, 4 PM.
Second.
All right, all those in favor, raise your right hand. Okay, that meeting is set. We've also had a request that's come out of conversations that I've had with Don Barnett and with Maggie McGee to kind of put a roundtable together for us to discuss maybe giving city manager, city staff some direction on some forward-looking thoughts that the EIC may have or develop about where to go out and seek opportunities for investment. We've kind of always been in a responsive mode, take what's been presented to us, and so we want to at least have a workshop to discuss whether it makes sense to give city staff some direction in terms of what we'd like them to bring to us. I know I have Maggie and Don's support to set that meeting, and I wanted to discuss it today and see if there was broader support for it among the rest of the group.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. Do we want to look at setting that on same time on a subsequent Monday?
Works for me. Mondays work good for me.
Okay.
These are good.
How about if we did those just back to back, meet on the 21st for our annual meeting and then on the 28th for our workshop?
Fine with me.
Got it.
Okay. All right, can I get a motion to approve that?
Make a motion, we set a special workshop meeting for June 28th at 4 o'clock.
Okay. Second?
Second.
All right, everybody approved, raise your right hand. All right, we'll have that set. Kesha, would you send an email out to the other members and just let them know of those dates and times, we can get it on their calendar?
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yes, sir.
If for some reason that there are calendar conflicts where we're not gonna be able to get the 28th of majority or even really the, 7.
Yeah, I'd really like to try to get everybody here.
Yeah, we may have new members
Sure.
too coming on. Do you want us to look at trying to put that on your regular meeting, or do you want a separate workshop?
I'm open to whatever. I was thinking just to not stretch the commitment too long per Monday, to set those on different Mondays. I don't really have a problem
Let
doing
us
either
do some
way.
calendaring, but we'll
Yeah, but check, let
check.
us know if there's a conflict, yeah, let's push it off and we can figure out
We
when
look at
is
some
a good
alternatives,
time.
but for now, we'll look at the 28th.
Okay? All right, next item on our agenda is to get an update on the downtown river trail concept and feasibility study.
I'd like to call Ashley Boyle up for the direct EIC on this item.
Good afternoon, EIC members. Before you this afternoon is the results of the findings for the concept study for the Kerrville River Trail downtown segment. And if you recall, the EIC funded a couple of months ago this study, and we're bringing that back to you tonight for your consideration, comments, and any questions that you may have. The EIC, as you remember, has funded the river trail since its conception in 2012. The trail is a total of 6 miles now. This new trail segment would run from the G Street trailhead across the river down to downtown, go past the Boardwalk Pavilion, and land at the Tranquility Island bridge area behind the library in Louise Hayes Park. This would be approximately a 1 mile segment. The City Council adopted the River Trail Master Plan in July of 2019, and this downtown segment was identified and included on the plan. I'll now turn it over to our engineering consulting firm, John Hewitt, to take you through the presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have afterwards.
Thank you.
John.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
So I'm going to present the results of this conceptual study. The scope of the study is on this slide right here. We wanted to look at the alignment of how we could best get from behind the HEB or the Butt Holdsworth Library down to G Street. So we looked at the alignment, then we considered the regulatory and the environmental issues, constructability issues that we may come into, estimate the project cost, and then consider if we want to phase it and what the schedule would be to construct that. So this schematic right here just shows you again, we go from the library down behind Grape Juice in that area, underneath Sidney Baker, behind the Arcadia Theater, all the way down to G Street. In our conceptual study, we broke this segment or this length of 5,100 feet into 4 study segments. So the first study segment is segment 1, which begins right behind the library. And we've got 2 pictures here. The one on the left is right underneath the library looking towards Sidney Baker. And then the picture on the far right is getting close to Sidney Baker Street. There's an existing footpath already in there. This is an easy segment to identify where we're going to put the trail. We've got a couple of crossings, some drainage crossings, but otherwise this is a really straightforward area. This particular segment is about 850 feet to get you to Sidney Baker. And you would be crossing underneath TxDOT's property, and you'd have to agree, or you'd have to enter into a multi-use agreement with TxDOT, which we've done before, and that hasn't been an issue in the past. So trail segment 1 is a straightforward segment. Segment 2 then starts at Sidney Baker and continues on to the pedestrian bridge that is located downstream of the little dam that's across from Tranquility Park there. This ties into an existing concrete walkway that you can see on the picture on the right. And we actually, Malcolm Matthews and I met with a registered accessibility specialist to talk about if we need to rip this out and put in a new segment or if we can reuse this. He said that we can reuse this, which saves the city a lot of money. So we can tie into the end of this, and feel free to interrupt me and ask questions while we go, but we can tie into this. We may need to put some more railing along the side of this, but we can tie into it. We may need to put some signage at the crossing of that existing bridge right there, but we would be allowed to just tie into the end of it.
And it's structurally and
Very good
it's good
shape.
enough for us to use.
Looks good.
Okay.
The behind Arcadia Theater and those other shops in there in that same area, it's a steep embankment. As you can kind of see on that picture on the left, that's a pretty steep embankment, and there are a couple of trees in there, but that may need some additional erosion control methods there. Trail segment 3 is what drives the cost of this overall section up. This starts there at the pedestrian bridge and continues to C Street. And so you would be going behind the, I guess it's the old Dietert mill that was, the shingle mill that was there that's back in the 1850s. So you go back behind that, you would go through some pretty tight areas that these two pictures kind of show, close to some big cypress trees. Would go past where there's talk of putting a Spring Hill Suites hotel in, past River Guide Village, and let me show you the next two pictures are kind of what it looks like behind River Guide Village. So it's going to be difficult to construct that. The picture on the left, we considered maybe you put it in right along that low part of the river. There's a shelf that you could possibly put it on, which is on the right-hand side. We also looked at going up the side of the slope. The next picture kind of shows 4 alternatives that we looked at. So one would be almost a boardwalk up very high on the slope. Another would be a boardwalk about halfway down the slope. A third one would be maybe I guess it would be a supported rock riprap concrete trail combination that would be on the shelf above the river. And then the fourth alternative that we looked at would be building the concrete trail right in the riverbed itself. So we looked at that in detail, and I can tell you that the two left options, which are boardwalks, are extremely expensive. They're very difficult for the contractor to build, and the boardwalks could be susceptible to the flooding. One of the thoughts we had going into this is that along Lady Bird Lake in Austin, they've got a river trail or a boardwalk on each side of the lake, and it's worked out great. But the difference is they don't have flash floods like we have in the Guadalupe River. The lake is a pretty constant level, and so they don't have to deal with that issue. When we started looking at this, it just got very expensive with your piers that would have to go down there, and really it wasn't economically feasible to do that. So what turned out to be the best option was to put this trail kind of low down, but on the shelf above where you would get the flooding. It would still be in the floodway, but in most of the case, maybe a 10-year storm would be below the level of this. So if you had less frequent storms, you could still use this trail at this location. And again, it would be a concrete trail with possibly a retaining wall and then piers into the bedrock, and possibly with a portion of this with the limestone blocks along the side of that. This would be about a 300 or 400 foot section that you would have to put this segment in.
And I've got and it's a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is it possible to actually put some of the sidewalk in those low-lying portions of the river instead of going up the bank? Can you take it into the riverbed?
Well, the environmental regulatory issues are what get you. And, I mean, even small rains would be underwater as well. And so you would have a lot more times where the river trail could not be used because the river would be up high from a rainstorm or rain event that happened several days before that. The river would still be up high where we looked at. So there'd be a lot of times where you couldn't use the river down there. The other thing is that you would get into more of the Parks and Wildlife impact. They would get a lot more involved in this on the regulatory side if you're down in the river. And that would mean a lot more delays, a lot more effort involved in that. I don't think that you would get into the core issue because that's a shelf. It's not really a wetlands area, and they get involved more when you get into the jurisdictional wetlands area. So that's the reason we didn't like that. And there's more risk. The lower you are down there, the more risk that could get washed out too.
Hey, John,
But a good section of our trail is at the height of the river, basically.
I don't have good pictures. I mean, I can show you that on the left. I mean, we're looking at below that ledge. I mean, it could be underwater today in that area close right now, so.
And again, I'm not trying to be argumentative, but almost all of Louis Hayes Park is not any higher than that.
I think the difference here, if you can kind of see on that picture on the right-hand side, you know, there, even in Louise Hayes Park, there is, you know, it kind of comes up on the embankment and then comes over. That's similar to what you would see here. You can kind of see that limestone line that goes across there. That's, and correct me if I'm wrong with the exact terminology is, John, but that's essentially the water line. It may not be there in this picture, but that's considered the state water line. So below that, you're basically
That's fine.
building underwater.
So John, in that third option that we're looking at right there, ballpark, what's the approximate elevation of that sidewalk to where the water line is?
It's best to look at the picture on the right. So that looks to be about 4 feet, that little ledge. You're where that little boulder is up in there.
So maybe 5 to 6 feet?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And we would put it a little bit higher and build that up even another couple of feet above that.
Okay.
Trail segment 4 goes from C Street to G Street, and that's the way we like it right there. It's manicured lawn right there. It's very quickly that can be built, and it would tie in under G Street. And we've already got a little extension headed that way, so it'll tie in very well there. Okay, so as far as the regulatory environmental issues, all of this trail would be built in the floodway. So there's City of Kerrville floodplain development permits that would have to be acquired. And we would have to demonstrate, or the designer of this project would have to demonstrate that they would not raise the flood level by putting this trail in. So there would be a no-rise analysis that would be required to satisfy the city permit requirements. The core permits would have to do with jurisdictional wetlands. And we do think that there's some wetlands down kind of behind River Guide Village. You get a good indicator of wetlands are large cypress trees, and we're very close to some large cypress trees. If we can stay under 1/10 of an acre of wetlands being disturbed, we can get a nationwide permit and it'll go fast. We think we're close in that area to that limit, and that would add several months into it if you have to get the a specific permit for this project. Parks and Wildlife are concerned about the threatened and endangered species. There's fat mucket mussels and a few other species down there that would have to be evaluated. We had an environmental consultant that helps us, was on this team on the conceptual study, and one of the things that they pointed out is that the current administration is pushing to get protected or threatened species to be protected species, which is going to make it harder to get permits through them. So their advice was to move quickly if we could on this. As a part of the final design, you would go in and you would determine the wetlands in the area that could be impacted. The TCEQ is concerned about stormwater pollution prevention and runoff and sedimentation into the river. So we'd have to, as a part of the design, control that. Cultural resources, the main concern would be right around that old mill. There would have to be an evaluation from a consultant to evaluate that, make sure that we don't adversely impact any kind of significant archaeological remnants. Again, they think that there's not a big concern that that'll hold up the project.
John, are any of these regulatory or environmental issues significantly different than what we've faced in the past for other segments of the trail?
I think that we're going to be more impacted by the wetlands. Well, I think we're getting closer to the wetlands on this one than the other projects.
Okay.
So otherwise, I don't think so.
Do you see that one as being a significant barrier?
No. My feel is that we can get through that.
John, you may want to speak to segments 3 and 4, and just some of the challenges there, I think in regards to some of the protected species, given the lower shelf and timelines on that, and some changes that are on the horizon potentially, just with federal regulations.
That's right. So I guess the threatened would be going into endangered. Is that what it is, Malcolm? That bucket mussel is threatened now, but could go to endangered, and that would slow down the overall process if that were to happen. And that's a federal evaluation, or federal involvement is looking at that right now. 3 and 4, 1 and 2 would not, I don't see any problems from a regulatory or environmental standpoint. Those will go very quickly. And so when we get into the schedule, you'll see that can be constructed pretty quickly. We've added a few months into the schedule for segments 3 and 4. Constructability issues for this 1 mile segment. One of the things we were concerned about was we're building right now a ADA accessible access behind the library, and over at G Street we have an accessible area across the river at G Street that's considered ADA accessible. We went and talked to the accessibility specialist, and they said that's all we need to do is provide one at one end and one at the other end. We don't need to provide additional access in between there for ADA compliance.
Great.
And that's helpful because we do have access down behind Grape Juice. You know, there's some steps down there that aren't ADA accessible. And then we have some access behind the pavilion also that are steps. But when we started this, we thought we may have to build some ramps and some switchbacks, I guess, in the area of the pavilion. Possibly we talked about having an upper trail and a lower trail that were connected with ADA accessible ramps, but it doesn't look like that's required from a regulatory standpoint. And again, the second item, connection to the existing pedestrian bridge and sidewalks. I spoke to that earlier, that we're able to do that. We would have to sign the existing pedestrian bridge like we've done elsewhere on the trail, where it says this is not ADA compliant, this crossing.
So right now, that crossing goes,
From under the pavilion, across there.
it just terminates.
Yeah, and I think
Gravel area.
people are walking back there to tie into the trail, right? I mean, it seems to be getting a lot of use over there.
But it's not, we don't have a concrete trail from the end of that bridge up to our current trail system.
That's correct.
Pretty wide path, though, I think.
Yeah, no, I understand, but that's,
Yeah.
The bridge, unfortunately, is not very wide, but the path, the gravel path is very wide.
The other difficulty for this segment compared to the others is getting the contractor access to the construction of the trail itself. I mean, you just think of those pictures that I showed behind Arcadia Theater. I mean, that's steep and difficult to get in, difficult to move his concrete back and forth. Access behind Grape Juice and the library is going to be, it's going to add cost to the overall project just for that.
we need a big barge.
That's right. Or yeah, you get across that way. I mean, we did that when we built it in the Tranquility Island. We went across that way, and I mean that's something that we would consider. You know, crossing over from the Tranquility Park. The other thing, and I mentioned this just briefly, is that we went into this thinking that we'd have an upper trail and a lower trail, and then we tie them together. After we've done this conceptual study, I don't think that's what we're recommending. We're just saying build a lower segment. You can have some stairs into that, but there would be no ramps between the two. So the project cost includes a contingency since all construction costs are going up on a daily basis. This is almost $2.7 million. This is for the entire 5,100 feet. There's a 10% design fee. The additional fees would be the cost associated with the survey, the geotechnical engineer, the environmental consultant, and then a structural engineer to do the additional design, and then the floodplain analysis. So that's what those additional fees are. So for the entire 1 mile segment, you're looking at $3 million, which is higher on account of the constructability issues, plus just the increase in cost over the last year. So we went in and we looked at phasing it. So we looked at different segments into different phases, and what seemed to work out best was to have segments 1 and 2 as a phase 1, segments 3 and 4 as a phase 2. So that if you built phase 1, you would get from the library to that pedestrian bridge, and then you could come back in phase 2 and go from the pedestrian bridge down to G Street. Phase 1 would be about 1,600 linear feet, and phase 2 would be the 3,500 feet. So phase 2 is longer and more costly, but that's where you get into all the steep slopes and the difficult construction areas behind River Guide Village. So if you looked at the cost, if you split it up that way, you can see it's not really, I mean, it's phase 1 could be done for less than $1 million, including all your design and additional fees. And the big chunk of your expenditure would be in the phase 2 segment.
Don, would it be prudent just to go ahead and do all the design and EPA and whatever other studies, do those all up front?
Yeah, that'd be good. That's a great point, because what you could do at that point is you could start the permitting from the environmental side for the more difficult phase 2, which is going to take longer. And that's right. So that would be a good idea.
If you took that other 300,000 out of phase 2 and included it in the phase 1, you're looking at about 1.1 million.
And then 1.9.
And that's going to lower that down to
yeah.
1.9 million on the other side.
That's right. Yeah.
Because none of that's going to change. The design's going to be the same. The engineering's going to be the same. And while somebody's working on it, it seems like it'd be prudent and possibly savings to go ahead and do it all on an
Yeah, that's a
upfront
very
basis.
good point. So the schedule, if you wanted to start phase 1 this summer, we're saying that from the time you kicked it off to the completion of the project would be 18 months. So what's that, January 2023, you could be constructed and open for phase 1 that way. And we've added 6 more months for phase 2. Now, like you're saying, if you started the design, you could shorten that overall schedule. So that's a brief summary of what we came up with, so I'm open for questions.
There's no action on your agenda tonight. We just really kind of want to deliver this study back to EIC. You guys funded it, and so it's really Q&A today. Certainly it's food for thought for direction on how you guys want us to proceed, but we're not anticipating any action from you guys tonight.
Who owns the land involved here?
We would have to get easements from 24 property owners, or there's 24 properties that we would go across.
So the city does have some easements, particularly in segments 1 and 2, but even then, there's still, I think, probably 4 or 5 additional easements that would need to be achieved even within that short section, just from Tranquility Island over to the existing pavilion.
Has there been discussions with most of the landowners up and down as far as acquiring those easements?
There's been some preliminary conversations.
Been positive?
I think so.
Yeah, I've had a lot of people express or question me and when this is going to happen, so there's a lot of interest in the community on it.
And personally, I know it's disappointing because I think we all, or at least I had this vision of the 2-tier accessing all the businesses off of Water Street, from their backsides or having easy access back and forth. But, at $3 million for the 1 mile, I can't imagine what it'd take to put that boardwalk in up on that top level and I'm not sure how aesthetically pleasing it would be with the big columns and all that, but it is kind of sobering or disappointing not to be able to access it easier, because I guess if you're at the bottom now, you're saying I can climb the steps below Grape Juice, or you said there's a staircase below the pavilion also that takes you all the way down there. Mm-hmm. So it's obtainable, it's just not easy.
Is this sort of an all or none? I mean, you wouldn't want to build one segment for some reason, not build the other, would you? Because you'd have just a piece down there not going anywhere really.
Yeah, you gotta tie it all together.
So it's gotta be an all or one.
I think one of the primary concerns with only achieving segment 1 and 2 is that we really don't necessarily have ADA access on that more easterly side until you get to G Street. And so, we can achieve it in phases, but it really should be a project that is moving towards full completion. Otherwise, we don't have those bookends of ADA access.
And what's our total cost in the River Trail now? How much do we have in it? Is it 6 million?
Let's see, we're right at about 6.5.
Yeah, close.
About 8, I think it was about
Oh,
6.5
with
for
the
the
new
first
section.
part,
That's
and
right.
then 1.5 to Shriner, so about 8.
About 8 million.
About 8 million for the roughly 6 miles.
So in past phases of the project, what's been the sequence between, moving forward with some kind of formal action and talking to the landowners about their willingness to grant an easement? Which comes first?
So we usually do that during the design process because we're able to really kind of hone in there on what's needed, where it's going, and begin those conversations. And sometimes it influences the design process. So that's usually when we're more fully engaged.
Does that mean that that's kind of post-formal action that, okay, this is something that city's going to do and or that the EIC is going to fund or whatever?
Yes, sir. We usually have a funding agreement in place before we go. Now, like I said, we've begun to attain easements already through contractual arrangements that we've had on various property owners within certain segments already within this town south section. So that's positive.
Mhm.
But yes, we'll become more aggressive on that. Certainly if you guys decide to move forward with funding.
Well, I'm anticipating the question that, so we spend $300,000 on engineering and we end up with, or design and engineering, and we have 2 people that won't give us easements.
Yeah, we typically don't complete that design engineering process until we've got all of our easements in place.
That's what I would like. I mean, I just don't want us
Yeah.
to have a great set of plans and nothing to do with them.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, we really can't, right? I mean, we can't complete that design engineering process until we have that because we have to know where it's gonna go.
you have to have access to the property, yeah,
Yes, sir.
okay.
Yes, sir.
That's fine. Good.
Yeah,
And
it's a little bit of
it's-
a dance, right? But
Yeah.
that's how we usually work through that.
And I guess the other question that I would like to see, and from Amy and EA, is how do we pay for it? What are our options on that? And I know we've looked at a myriad of different options. I mean, that phase 1, we could probably do out of pocket. I mean, over a couple of years anyway, spreading that out. But I think if we get into the other phase, we're gonna have to look at a little bit longer term, So I would like to request at least some options from staff of how, if we decide to go forward, can we afford it and how can we pay for it?
I think Amy's already done some work she gave us some options within the last couple of months about what debt options that we have, either through EIC or the city, and
But now that
so,
we've got the numbers, I would like to
Yeah.
see it kind of broken down a little bit.
okay, is that something you could work on, Amy?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
We'll be bringing you guys, through your normal summer budget process, some forecasts and other pieces. So we'll add that into the conversation.
Thought to how much money you might try to keep dry for, Gil's working on an awful lot of things, and we're certainly looking at some potential good things happening. So, I want to, have some kind of, when to do the get together and brainstorm about what we're doing with money. We got to say, we want to be ready to take care of those people.
Yep.
Amy, what's our amortization been on prior debt related to the river trail? Is it 5, 10, 15 years or
20.
20? Okay. All right.
In your estimate, because we're talking 2 years, 3 years to build. Obviously, the last year, we've seen an incredible increase in just the cost of construction from labor, concrete, everything. How much contingency do you have in that number for increases over this 24-month period?
20%.
20%?
Any other questions? All right,
Thanks.
thank you, John. All right, that concludes item 6C on our agenda. Next item is our executive session. I'll entertain a motion to go into executive session under sections 551.071 and 551.087 to discuss an amendment to the Economic Development Incentive Agreement between Kerrville's Fourth on the River, Inc. and the City of Kerrville, Texas EIC.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Okay? It is 4:50. We are adjourned into executive session. All right, 5:17, we are out of executive session, and I will adjourn us unless there is any announcements or,
No action was taken.
no action taken. Okay, we're adjourned, 5:17.